Howdy. Hey, last PowerPoint for week, I promise. But we really need to talk about how today China and Asia have become such an economic powerhouse. I want you to look at your book on page 420. It'll talk about it a little bit, but I want to give you some more background so you understand because it's a changing process. China might be the big economic powerhouse of Asia today, but that doesn't mean it'll be that way tomorrow. Really, we talk about something called the Four Tigers. These were the four Asian countries where technology and industry kind of really explode first. They're South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. At that time, Hong Kong was not part of China. It was still under British rule, and so it was separate. And those four areas are called the Four Tigers. It really starts with Japan. In the 1960s and 70s, Japan starts becoming a very technological country. It's rebuilt itself from World War II, and they start taking over a lot of industries and technologies, especially electronics. Crud, I remember as a kid, Japanese transistor radios and stuff like that. And then later on, you start thinking about all the big electronic companies that are out there today that are Japanese. Okay, and the Japanese economy really explodes, which leads to Japan and other countries around looking to areas to go ahead and offshore or farm out some areas. Right next to Japan is South Korea. And South Korea, which had been devastated in the 1950s, is a nice, logical place for Japanese companies to go. Today, South Korea is a huge industrialized nation, a lot of technology. And so South Korea would start developing stuff. Again, today you think of the Samsungs and all the companies that produce a lot of your electronics and stuff in both Japan and South Korea. Hong Kong was where you could get the benefit of having like Chinese labor without having to go to China, which was communist at the time. But Hong Kong, under the British, was very capitalistic. And a lot of companies would focus in Hong Kong. Taiwan, that little island off of China, again, where the people didn't want to be communist in China, went to in the 50s. Well, Taiwan becomes a big manufacturing area too. And then lastly, of course, Singapore, little dot at the bottom of the peninsula there below like Vietnam. That is a city-state, and Singapore becomes a big area too. As a matter of fact, last year I took the wife out and saw Crazy Rich Asians, and that talks about Singapore and all the wild money that's coming into Asia as Asia's developing now. All right, because these areas called the Four Tigers, their economy starts to really improve and ramp up in international trade. So those are where it starts. The Chinese government starts to notice that and starts saying, hey, I want some of that too. And in 1999, the British are forced to give Hong Kong back to China. Now, China's not stupid. Hong Kong produces a crud load of money for them, so they do something called two countries, this two separate state system. Basically, Hong Kong is part of China, but China is not going to mess with that economic engine of Hong Kong because they want the money. So if you look at the map here, you can see the industrialized areas of Japan, South Korea, and a little on Taiwan there. But take a look at China. China's always had industrial areas, especially up in the Manchuria area. That's their Pittsburgh area where their coal and stuff was. But to get into this thing, as the Chinese government changes, they are going to go ahead and open up what are called SEZs. That's important for your notes. Special Economic Zones. Originally, the Chinese Communist government thought that they could control this whole thing. But if they allowed foreign companies to come in these SEZs and develop factories and stuff like that, then China would be able to get more jobs, more money, and that would be able to give them a lot to build their infrastructure and to build a modern country. So they open up these SEZs. Well, American companies start coming in there and building factories, and they love the lower labor cost. And so it really becomes a huge shift in the 80s, especially the 90s and the aughts, to put your factory in China, manufacture it in China, get the lower wages, and using those container ships we talked about before, just ship that stuff to the United States. If you look at the picture here, that's President Xi, and Xi has been really smart for China. He understands that you have to have industrial growth. And in China, the government kind of does certain things. They do protect the Chinese companies. And if you're an American company and you want to move to China, well, there's a little bit of, you have to work with them, and there's a little transfer of knowledge to them, which they use. And the Chinese government has not exactly protected American inventions and intellectual rights very well, and we've kind of complained about it. but there wasn't much the United States could do about it. If you're like Google and you want to access China, you have to follow the rules that China says. I mean, if they say you can't look up, what was it? There was a movement. Oh man, I'm trying to remember what it was, but there was a movement that that the Chinese government decided they would lock down on, and basically they blocked it. Now, if you're Google, hell yeah, you want to be in China, so you follow these rules and you won't let them check stuff out. Okay, so China has become more protective, and they start developing industries, and they're taking the money that our companies are putting into China, and they're investing back in American bonds, but other stuff. Enter in the scheme of things, President Trump. You see him in a picture here shaking hands with the leader of China. And President Trump has said, hey, these Chinese companies are not being fair to us. And so in the last year, you've noticed there's been a lot of tariffs and stuff. If you look at the graph, look how much we import from China and what we export to them. Really, our biggest export to China, ag products. Think about the beef, the pork, soybeans and stuff like that. But what we get from China, good crud. Go to Walmart and see what isn't made in China on the shelves. Well, right now, there's nothing on the shelves of Walmart, apparently, especially if it's toilet paper. But anyhow, so the United States and China entered what was called a trade war. Trump put tariffs on products from China to America. Hopefully, again, remember a tariff, something on a foreign company, a product, if you put a tariff on it, it raises the price of it. So that makes domestic and other options look a lot more appealing. However, in this case, the tariffs were more punitive, saying to China, well, unless you do what we want, we're going to add tariffs to your thing and make people in America either unwilling or unable to buy your product. Now, so you have the rise of the four tigers. Then you have China saying, we want that too. And then China starting to rise up. But with this whole new trade war with America, you got a problem. It becomes harder to do business in China as American companies. The other reason that made it hard to do business in China as American companies, as the people in China, especially like those making your cell phones, Foxconn, are working in China, the wages go up. And your profit margin drops as the wages go up. And it gets harder to find qualified labor in China, so they have to pay more. So a lot of American companies, just like the four tigers, shift from Japan to these four areas, and then from those four tigers to China. Well, now it's shifting from China too. You want to see, they say the picture's worth 1,000 words. Take a look at this picture. This right here is a Chinese air conditioner plant. Look at them ready to go. Now, can you imagine that same plant in America, like after the Super Bowl, or hey, during any Thursday or Friday during March Madness, and you think we're going to be standing like that ready to go? I'm not so sure. And if you look up above, there's where they ship everything out of China in those container ships, And so Singapore's become a very big entrepot where, things going into Asia and out of Asia are centered through certain areas because in those container ships, they can bundle stuff up and out. We'll talk about that in the urban unit. Not just China, but after the rise of the four tigers, India and other areas in Asia start looking like a really good deal. The country of India, huge country, a lot of population for labor, and so a lot of companies start going to China. You see the picture over there of the woman in the call center. We watched the parts of the movie Outsourced, and here so you understand what I'm talking about, where American companies start looking at India. Because again, obviously you have a lot of high quality people there, education, can speak English. A lot of American call companies makes more sense to go there to India. But there's other parts of India, the Indian steel industry and stuff like that too. If you want to buy like a pocket knife, take a look at the blade. It'll always be stamped either India or China or Pakistan. It's just the way it is. And so a lot of industrialization has moved to Asia where the factories are. And so that's part of that new international division of labor. But again, as we talk, with the trade war, with the tariffs, and with the costs in China rising of manufacturing, companies started looking at different options. And when we got in this trade war spiff with China, the most natural place, if you look at the map on the bottom there, Vietnam, right next to China. And a lot of companies started moving down to Vietnam. It's kind of interesting because in here, when we did the assignment, I had you show me where your tennis shoes and other stuff were made. How many of your tennis shoes, we talk about it here, were stamped made in Vietnam? Well, look at the picture up there. Again, look at the people eager to work, that clean factory. Ma'am, I'm moving to Vietnam if I'm a company in China because I don't want to deal with this trade uncertainty and tariffs and stuff like that. Why not move to Vietnam? But I'm not the only one that thinks that. Think about all the other companies that are thinking the same thing at the same time. So if you look at the picture in the corner up there, all the traffic problems in Vietnam, it has become unruly. A lot of companies have moved to Vietnam, and that makes the wages of Vietnam go rise as people are competing for the same laborers. The infrastructure is obviously stressed. So what's happening, just like as you see this process from Japan to the Four Tigers to China to Vietnam, now it's even shifting from Vietnam to other areas in Asia, especially down in Indonesia and Malaysia right by there. And then again, when we did that assignment, a lot of you guys had tennis shoes made in Indonesia. And you got Thailand, Myanmar. I mean, what you're talking about is you're moving around. Remember that whole concept, footloose. Move your factories where you can get the most. Okay? Now, one last thing I want you to consider is a lot of times we go to these countries, we take advantage of people, whatnot, but there is a big movement out there for free trade, fair trade products, which respect the people in the countries that you see. Mostly in Omaha, you'll see this in the grocery store if you look at coffee or other things that'll have that fair trade stuff on it. But it's starting to be other stuff too. People around the world are starting to think about being ethical in outsourcing our business and our jobs. All right, this process is going to continue. This is just like one step. A lot of businesses are looking at what's going to be the next Four Tigers or the next Vietnam or the next area. And there's other areas in the world where development could come as the infrastructure grows. And we talked about that like with Africa. All right. I'm also going to have then a couple articles I want you to take a look at on the classroom that I want you to look at that talk about how countries are shifting. All right. Take care.